In a quiet suburban neighborhood where tree-lined streets and well-maintained lawns gave the illusion of safety, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Reed lived a life many would envy. He was a man who commanded respect, not just because of his towering physique or sharp gaze, but because of the weight of his accomplishments. A highly decorated Delta Force commander, Marcus had spent years serving his country in some of the most dangerous corners of the world. Yet, despite his storied career, he cherished nothing more than coming home to his wife, Dr. Elena Reed. Elena was the heart of their household. A pediatrician with a warm smile and an unwavering dedication to her patients, she had built a reputation for going above and beyond for underserved children in their community. Her clinic buzzed with activity during the day as parents brought in their little ones, knowing they were in good hands. Elena's kindness knew no bounds, and it made her beloved by everyone who crossed her path. Together, Marcus and Elena embodied strength and compassion, a perfect balance that seemed unshakable. But beneath the surface of this idyllic life lay unseen dangers. The Reeds' interracial marriage wasn't universally accepted, especially not by those who clung to outdated beliefs, rooted in hate. While Marcus and Elena chose to focus on the positives, ignoring occasional disapproving glances or whispered comments, there were people watching them, people who saw their union as a threat to their warped worldview. One crisp autumn evening, Elena left her clinic later than usual. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the parking lot. She hummed softly to herself as she walked toward her car, her mind already drifting to dinner plans and the cozy night ahead with Marcus. But as she reached for her car door, something felt off. Before she could react, a van screeched to a halt beside her. Masked figures jumped out, grabbing her roughly and shoving her into the vehicle before speeding away into the night. The attack happened so quickly that no one noticed. By the time witnesses came forward to report hearing tires squealing or seeing a flash of movement, it was too late. Panic rippled through the town when news broke about Elena's abduction. Social media lit up with posts sharing photos of her smiling face, urging anyone with information to come forward. Friends, colleagues, and strangers alike prayed for her safe return. When Marcus arrived home that evening, he immediately sensed something was wrong. Dinner sat untouched on the counter, and Elena's phone lay abandoned on the kitchen table, a rare sight for someone as organized as she was. His military instincts kicked in as he scanned the house, searching for clues. In the driveway, shards of glass glittered under the porch light, and faint tire marks marred the pavement. It didn't take long for him to piece together what had likely happened. A wave of emotions crashed over Marcus: fear, anger, helplessness, but he pushed them aside. This wasn't the battlefield, but it required the same level of focus and determination. He called the police, providing every detail he could think of while pacing anxiously. Officers arrived promptly, dusting for fingerprints and securing the scene. Though they assured Marcus they were doing everything possible, he couldn't shake the feeling that bureaucracy would slow things down. Every second counted, and he refused to wait around hoping someone else would save his wife. As the hours ticked by, Marcus began piecing together fragments of information himself. He remembered overhearing snippets of conversations at local events, subtle threats disguised as casual remarks. Someone had once muttered something about keeping traditions alive, glaring pointedly at Marcus and Elena as they walked hand in hand. At the time he dismissed it as ignorance, but now those memories loomed large in his mind. Using his access to classified resources and contacts within the military, Marcus started digging deeper. He discovered that a white supremacist gang called the Iron Vanguard had been growing bolder in recent months. Their name appeared in connection with several violent incidents targeting minorities, though none had garnered significant attention from law enforcement. The group prided itself on staying under the radar, operating in shadowy networks that made them difficult to track. It didn't take long for Marcus to connect the dots. The timing of Elena's kidnapping, combined with the gang's escalating rhetoric, suggested they were behind her abduction. What terrified him most was realizing this wasn't random. It was personal. The Iron Vanguard had deliberately targeted Elena because of who she was: a successful black woman, married to a high-ranking military officer. To them, the Reeds represented everything they despised, a symbol of progress and unity they sought to destroy. Marcus knew he couldn't rely solely on official channels. Time was slipping away, and he couldn't risk bureaucratic red tape costing him his wife's life. Drawing on decades of experience, he began formulating a plan. First, he secured his home and ensured his own safety, knowing the gang might try to retaliate if they realized he was onto them. Then he reached out to a former teammate turned private investigator named Jake Carter. Jake had worked alongside Marcus during some of his toughest missions, and though he'd since retired, he still possessed the skills and connections needed to help track down Elena. Together, Marcus and Jake pored over surveillance footage, social media posts, and encrypted chat logs linked to the Iron Vanguard. Each lead brought them closer to understanding the gang's motives and its weaknesses. They uncovered evidence suggesting the gang planned to use Elena as leverage against Marcus, broadcasting her captivity live to force him into making a public statement denouncing integration efforts in the armed forces. If he refused, they vowed to execute her. The thought of losing Elena gnawed at Marcus, but he refused to let despair consume him. Instead, he channeled his emotions into action. With Jake's assistance, he assembled a small team of trusted allies, all former Delta Force operatives who shared his commitment to justice. United by a common goal, they prepared for a mission unlike any they'd faced before, infiltrating the Iron Vanguard's stronghold and bringing Elena home alive. As Marcus geared up for the fight of his life, he allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. He thought about Elena's resilience, her ability to find light even in the darkest situations. That same spirit fueled him now, driving him forward despite the odds stacked against him. Whatever lay ahead, Marcus vowed to do whatever it took to save the woman he loved and to ensure those responsible paid for their crimes. Marcus knew he couldn't afford to waste a single second. With Elena's life hanging in the balance, every decision he made had to be precise and calculated. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders, but years of military training had taught him how to channel fear into focus. He began by gathering as much information as possible about the Iron Vanguard. This wasn't just about finding Elena. It was about understanding the enemy, their methods, and their weaknesses. Jake Carter proved to be an invaluable ally. A tech-savvy investigator with a knack for uncovering hidden truths, Jake dove headfirst into the digital underworld where the Iron Vanguard operated. Using encrypted communication channels and dark web forums, the gang communicated in code, making it nearly impossible for outsiders to infiltrate their network. But Jake was no ordinary investigator. He'd spent years honing his skills during his time in Delta Force, and now those skills were being put to the test. For hours, Marcus and Jake sat hunched over laptops in Marcus's home office, scanning through lines of text and analyzing patterns. They discovered that the Iron Vanguard prided itself on staying decentralized. No single leader controlled everything. Instead, smaller cells operated independently, carrying out attacks while maintaining loose connections to one another. This structure made them harder to dismantle, but it also meant they weren't as coordinated as they thought they were. One name kept popping up in their research: Dax Crenshaw. Known within the gang as the Enforcer, Crenshaw was rumored to be ruthless, with a reputation for leaving no witnesses behind. His role seemed to involve overseeing high-profile operations, which suggested he might have been directly involved in Elena's abduction. If they could find Crenshaw, they might be able to trace him back to wherever Elena was being held. But tracking down someone like Crenshaw wouldn't be easy. He was careful, covering his tracks meticulously. That's when Jake stumbled upon something promising: a low-ranking member of the gang who went by the alias Iron Fist. Unlike his higher-ups, Iron Fist wasn't particularly discreet. In fact, he'd recently posted a series of cryptic messages online bragging about an upcoming big move that would send shockwaves through the country. While the post didn't explicitly mention Elena, the timing and tone strongly hinted at her kidnapping. Marcus recognized this as their best lead yet. Together, he and Jake tracked Iron Fist to a rundown apartment complex on the outskirts of town. It was a risky move. They had no idea how many other gang members might be present, but Marcus couldn't afford to wait. Every moment counted, and hesitation could cost Elena her life. Under the cover of darkness, Marcus and Jake approached the building, moving silently like shadows. Years of working together had created an unspoken bond between them, allowing them to anticipate each other's movements without needing words. They slipped inside through a side entrance, avoiding security cameras and patrolling guards. Inside, the air smelled stale, and the dim lighting cast eerie shadows along the walls. They found Iron Fist in a cluttered living room, surrounded by propaganda posters and weapons scattered across the floor. He looked startled when Marcus and Jake burst in, clearly not expecting company. Before he could reach for a nearby gun, Marcus subdued him with swift efficiency, pinning him to the ground. Jake quickly secured the area, ensuring there were no surprises lurking nearby. With Iron Fist incapacitated, Marcus began questioning him. At first, the man refused to talk, spitting insults and threats instead. But Marcus had faced far tougher adversaries in his career, and he wasn't about to let this thug stand in his way. Calmly but firmly, he leaned in close, locking eyes with Iron Fist. "You're going to tell me where she is," Marcus said, his voice steady and commanding. "Or I'll make sure you regret ever joining this gang." It wasn't just the threat that broke Iron Fist. It was the intensity in Marcus's gaze. There was no room for negotiation here, no chance of escape. Slowly, the man began talking, revealing fragments of information about the gang's plans. Elena, he confirmed, was being held at an abandoned factory in rural Tennessee. The location was chosen because it was isolated, surrounded by dense woods that made it nearly impossible to approach undetected. The gang intended to live stream her captivity, forcing Marcus to denounce his military service or face the consequences. As Marcus listened, his mind raced with possibilities. He thanked Iron Fist sarcastically for his cooperation before knocking him unconscious and tying him up. They left him there, knowing law enforcement would eventually find him and piece together what had happened. For now, though, Marcus and Jake had what they needed: a destination. Back at Marcus's house, the team regrouped to plan their next steps. Joining them were 3 other former Delta Force operatives, men Marcus trusted with his life. Each brought unique skills to the table: tactical expertise, medical knowledge, and survival instincts honed by years on the front lines. Together, they formed a tight-knit unit ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. Using satellite imagery and drone footage, they mapped out the factory compound in painstaking detail. The facility sprawled across acres of land with multiple buildings connected by narrow pathways. Guard towers dotted the perimeter, manned by armed sentries keeping watch day and night. Inside, they identified potential holding areas where Elena might be kept. A basement level reinforced with steel doors seemed the most likely candidate. The team discussed various strategies, weighing the pros and cons of each approach. Stealth was their priority. Storming in guns blazing would risk Elena's safety. Instead, they decided to split into 2 groups. One would infiltrate the outer perimeter, taking out guards quietly and disabling alarms. The second group, led by Marcus himself, would breach the main building and locate Elena. Timing would be critical. If anything went wrong, the entire mission could unravel. As preparations continued, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of vulnerability. Alone in his bedroom, he stared at a photo of him and Elena taken on their wedding day. Her radiant smile reminded him of why he was doing this, not just for justice, but for love. She was his anchor, his reason for fighting even when the odds seemed insurmountable. He whispered a silent promise to her. "I'm coming. Hold on." The following morning, the team loaded into unmarked vehicles and set off toward Tennessee. The drive was long and tense, each mile bringing them closer to the unknown. Conversations were minimal, with everyone lost in their own thoughts. Marcus reviewed the plan repeatedly in his mind, anticipating every possible scenario. What if the guards spotted them? What if Elena wasn't where they expected her to be? These questions haunted him, but he pushed them aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. When they finally arrived at the edge of the forest surrounding the factory, The team parked their vehicles out of sight and geared up for the operation. Night had fallen, cloaking them in darkness and providing cover as they moved through the trees. The air was thick with tension, every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs sounding deafening in the silence. Marcus took a deep breath, steadying himself. He glanced at his teammates, nodding once to signal they were ready. This was it, the moment they'd been preparing for. As they stepped into the shadows, Marcus felt a surge of determination wash over him. No matter what happened next, he was determined to bring Elena home. Failure wasn't an option. The dense woods surrounding the abandoned factory were eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by a cool night breeze. Marcus and his team moved like ghosts through the underbrush, their footsteps muffled by years of training and discipline. Each man carried only what was essential: weapons, tools, and communication devices, all chosen for their reliability and silence. The air was thick with anticipation, every breath measured, every movement deliberate. They knew the stakes. One wrong step could mean disaster. As they approached the outer perimeter of the factory compound, Marcus signaled for the team to halt. He scanned the area carefully, taking in the layout of the guard towers and the positions of the sentries pacing below. The guards appeared alert, but predictable, their movements forming a routine that Marcus quickly memorized. This was exactly what he needed, a pattern to exploit. He motioned for two members of the team, Ryan and Cole, to circle around and take out the guards quietly. Both men nodded, disappearing into the shadows without a sound. Ryan and Cole moved with precision, closing in on their targets from opposite directions. Using suppressed weapons and hand-to-hand combat techniques honed over years of service, they eliminated the guards swiftly and silently. Not a single alarm was triggered. Once the coast was clear, Marcus led the rest of the team forward, slipping through gaps in the fence and advancing toward the main building. Every step brought them closer to Elena, but it also heightened the tension. They were deep in enemy territory now, and there was no turning back. Inside the factory, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. What had once been a bustling industrial site was now a chilling labyrinth of rusted machinery, crumbling walls, and dimly lit corridors. The gang had repurposed the space into a makeshift fortress, complete with barricades, surveillance cameras, and armed patrols. Marcus's team moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows and avoiding detection at all costs. Their goal was simple: locate Elena and neutralize any threat standing in their way. It didn't take long for them to discover unsettling evidence of the Iron Vanguard's operations. In one room, they found stacks of propaganda materials, flyers, posters, and pamphlets, filled with hateful rhetoric designed to incite fear and division. Nearby, crates of weapons and ammunition were stored haphazardly, suggesting the gang wasn't just planning isolated attacks, but something far more sinister. The scale of their operation sent a chill down Marcus's spine. These weren't just thugs, they were organized, dangerous, and growing bolder by the day. But then, in another part of the building, they stumbled upon something far worse: video footage of past victims. Projected onto a cracked monitor, grainy recordings showed terrified individuals pleading for mercy before being executed in cold blood. The images were horrifying, a grim reminder of what awaited Elena if they failed. Marcus clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay focused. He couldn't afford to let emotion cloud his judgment. Not now, not when they were so close. Finally, after what felt like hours of navigating the maze-like structure, they reached the basement level. A heavy steel door blocked their path, reinforced with locks and security measures that would have deterred most intruders. But Marcus and his team weren't ordinary intruders. Working together, they dismantled the locking mechanism using specialized tools, careful not to trigger any alarms. When the door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase leading downward, Marcus took point, his weapon raised and ready. At the bottom of the stairs, they found a series of cells, each containing remnants of previous captives, chains, torn clothing, and graffiti scratched into the walls. But one cell stood out from the others. Through the barred window, they could see Elena sitting on a cot, her head bowed but her posture defiant. She looked exhausted, her face bruised and her arms bound. But she was alive. Relief washed over Marcus, but it was short-lived. Standing beside her, guarding the cell, was Dax Crenshaw himself. Crenshaw was everything Marcus had imagined him to be, and worse. Tall, muscular, and radiating menace, he exuded an aura of calculated cruelty. His eyes narrowed as he noticed the intruders, and a cruel smile spread across his face. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he sneered, stepping closer to Elena and pulling her to her feet. He pressed a knife to her throat, his grip tight enough to make her wince but not hard enough to draw blood. At least not yet. "You're too late, soldier. Your wife is mine now." Marcus froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to act, to charge forward and tear Crenshaw apart with his bare hands if necessary. But he knew better than to rush into a situation like this. One wrong move and Elena would pay the price. Instead, he locked eyes with Crenshaw, his expression calm but unyielding. "Let her go," he said, his voice steady despite the storm, raging inside him. "This doesn't have to end badly for anyone." Crenshaw laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "Oh, but it does," he replied. "You see, your kind doesn't belong here. You think you can march in with your fancy uniform and take whatever you want? Well, tonight, you're going to learn what happens when you mess with people like us." Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied Crenshaw, analyzing his body language and searching for weaknesses. The man was arrogant, confident in his ability to intimidate. That arrogance would be his downfall. Slowly, Marcus lowered his weapon, placing it on the ground, as a gesture of goodwill. "Fine," he said, keeping his tone even. "If you want to prove your point, do it face to face. No hostages, no tricks, just you and me." For a moment, Crenshaw hesitated, clearly taken aback by the offer. He glanced at Elena, then back at Marcus, weighing his options. Finally, he smirked and shoved her aside, kicking the cell door open. "All right, tough guy," he growled. "Let's see what you got." As soon as Elena was free, Marcus's teammates sprang into action. While two of them rushed to untie her and escort her to safety, Marcus squared off against Crenshaw. The fight was brutal and intense, a clash of raw power and skill. Crenshaw swung wildly, fueled by rage and hatred, but Marcus remained composed, dodging and countering with surgical precision. Years of combat training gave him the edge he needed, allowing him to anticipate Crenshaw's moves and exploit his mistakes. With one final blow, Marcus disarmed Crenshaw and pinned him to the ground, pressing his knee firmly against the man's chest. Breathing heavily, he leaned in close, his voice low but deadly serious. "This ends now," he said, "and if you or anyone else ever comes near my family again, I'll make sure you regret it." Crenshaw glared up at him, defeated but still defiant. Marcus signaled for his team to secure him, ensuring he wouldn't escape. Then, with the immediate threat neutralized, he turned his attention to Elena. She was pale and shaken but alive, and that was all that mattered. As she collapsed into his arms, sobbing with relief, Marcus held her tightly, vowing never to let her go again. With Elena safe and Crenshaw subdued, the team regrouped and prepared to extract themselves from the compound. They disabled the remaining guards and rigged the facility with charges to destroy any evidence of the gang's activities. As they made their way back through the woods, the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the landscape. It was a new day, one filled with hope and the promise of justice. Though the mission had been successful, Marcus knew their fight was far from over. The Iron Vanguard might have been dealt a crippling blow, but its ideology still lingered, poisoning minds and fueling hatred. For now, though, he allowed himself a moment of peace, holding Elena close and thanking whatever higher power had guided them through the darkness. Together, they would heal, rebuild, and continue standing as a beacon of resilience against the forces that sought to divide them. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees as Marcus and his team moved swiftly toward their extraction point, Elena safely tucked between them. Her steps were unsteady, her body battered, but her spirit unbroken. She leaned heavily, on Marcus, who supported her with one arm while keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. The factory compound was behind them now, its ominous silhouette fading into the distance, but none of them dared to relax just yet. They were still deep in enemy territory, and the danger wasn't entirely over. As they navigated the dense forest, the sound of distant shouting reached their ears. It was faint at first, muffled by the thick canopy above, but it grew louder with each passing second. Marcus signaled for the team to stop and pressed a finger to his lips, urging silence. Peering through the foliage, they spotted several members of the Iron Vanguard emerging from the factory, armed and visibly agitated. Clearly, someone had discovered Crenshaw's capture and raised the alarm. The gang members fanned out, searching for intruders, their voices sharp and urgent. Marcus's mind raced. If they stayed on their current path, they risked running straight into the gang's search party. But doubling back would waste precious time, giving the Iron Vanguard more opportunity to regroup and retaliate. Every second counted. Elena needed medical attention, and the longer they remained exposed, the higher the chances of something going wrong. After a quick consultation with his team, Marcus decided to change course, leading them deeper into the woods along a less direct route. It would be tougher terrain, but it offered better cover. The decision proved wise. As they picked their way through the underbrush, the shouts of the gang members faded into the background. Still, Marcus kept the group moving at a steady pace, ensuring they maintained enough distance to stay safe. He could feel Elena trembling beside him, her strength waning with every step. "We're almost there," he whispered, squeezing her hand reassuringly. Just a little farther. Despite the physical toll the mission had taken on all of them, morale remained high. Each member of the team understood the gravity of what they'd accomplished. Not only had they rescued Elena, but they'd also dealt a significant blow to the Iron Vanguard's operations. By capturing Dax Crenshaw and destroying the factory, they dismantled one of the gang's key strongholds. Yet Marcus knew this victory came with consequences. The Iron Vanguard wouldn't take this lying down. They'd retaliate, and when they did, Marcus intended to be ready. After nearly an hour of navigating the rugged landscape, the team finally reached their rendezvous point, a secluded clearing where two unmarked vans awaited them. Jake Carter stood guard nearby, his expression tense but relieved as he caught sight of the group approaching. "About time," he muttered, though the relief in his voice was unmistakable. Without wasting a moment, they helped Elena into one of the vans, wrapping her in blankets and tending to her injuries as best they could. Though she tried to insist she was fine, her exhaustion was evident, and Marcus refused to let her brush off the severity of her ordeal. Once everyone was loaded, up and accounted for, the convoy set off, leaving the forest and the remnants of the Iron Vanguard behind. The ride back was quiet, the weight of the night's events settling over them like a heavy blanket. Elena rested her head against Marcus's shoulder, her eyes closed but sleep eluding her. She occasionally murmured words of gratitude, her voice soft but filled with emotion. Marcus simply held her close, offering silent reassurance that they were safe now, or as safe as they could be. By the time they arrived at a secure location, a remote cabin owned by one of the team members, the sun was fully risen, bathing the world in warm light. It was a stark contrast to the darkness they'd left behind. Inside the cabin, they set up a makeshift medical station, cleaning and dressing Elena's wounds while checking for any signs of serious injury. Thankfully, her bruises and cuts were superficial, though the psychological scars would take much longer to heal. Marcus stayed by her side throughout, refusing to leave even for a moment. While Elena rested, Marcus gathered his team for a debriefing. They reviewed the night's events, discussing what had gone well and identifying areas for improvement. The operation had been successful, but it hadn't been flawless. Several close calls reminded them how unpredictable and dangerous missions like this could be. Still, there was no denying the significance of their achievement. They'd struck a major blow against the Iron Vanguard, sending a clear message that hate and violence wouldn't go unanswered. Their conversation eventually turned to what came next. With Dax Crenshaw in custody and the factory destroyed, law enforcement would soon descend on the area, rounding up surviving gang members and gathering evidence. Marcus planned to share everything they'd uncovered: the propaganda materials, weapons caches, and video footage of past victims with federal authorities. This wasn't just about justice for Elena. It was about dismantling the entire network that had enabled the Iron Vanguard to operate unchecked for so long. But Marcus also knew the fight extended beyond arrests and prosecutions. Hate groups like the Iron Vanguard thrived because of ignorance and fear, preying on those who felt marginalized or disenfranchised. To truly combat such ideologies, society needed education, dialogue, and unity. As someone who had spent his life serving others, Marcus felt a personal responsibility to contribute to that effort. He resolved to use his platform, not just as a decorated soldier but as a husband and advocate, to speak out against racism and extremism, inspiring others to do the same. Later that evening, as the team settled in for some much-needed rest, Marcus found himself alone with Elena for the first time since rescuing her. Sitting beside her on the couch, he gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, studying her features as if committing them to memory. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This never should have happened." Elena reached up, placing a hand on his cheek. "You saved me," she replied softly. "That's all that matters now." Her words carried a weight that silenced Marcus's self-recrimination. He nodded, pulling her into a tight embrace. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to breathe deeply, letting the enormity of their survival sink in. As the hours passed, the cabin grew quiet, the only sounds being the crackling of the fireplace and the occasional murmur of conversation among the team. Outside, the world seemed vast and indifferent, untouched by the drama that had unfolded within its borders. But inside the cabin, there was a sense of solidarity, a shared understanding that they had faced evil together and emerged victorious. Still, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was merely the beginning. The Iron Vanguard might be weakened, but its ideology persisted, lurking in the shadows and waiting for another chance to rise. He vowed to remain vigilant, not just for Elena's sake, but for the countless others who might become targets of hate. Love and courage had brought them through the darkest night, but the dawn ahead would require resilience, determination, and unwavering hope. And as long as Marcus drew breath, he would stand as a shield against hatred, a protector of those who couldn't defend themselves, and a beacon of light in even the bleakest of times. In the weeks that followed Elena's rescue, life began to settle into a fragile rhythm for Marcus and his wife. Physically, Elena was healing. Her bruises faded, her cuts scabbed over, and her strength slowly returned. But emotionally, she carried scars that ran deeper than any wound. Nightmares plagued her sleep, vivid flashes of the factory basement and Dax Crenshaw's cruel smile haunting her whenever she closed her eyes. During the day, loud noises or sudden movements would send her heart racing, reminders of the terror she had endured. Marcus watched her struggle with a mix of helplessness and determination. He couldn't erase what had happened, but he could be there for her every step of the way. Together they attended therapy sessions where Elena worked, through her trauma with the guidance of a compassionate counselor. At first she hesitated to open up, afraid of burdening Marcus with the full weight of her pain. But as the weeks passed, she found solace in sharing her story, not just with him, but with others who had faced similar horrors. Her resilience amazed everyone around her, including Marcus, who marveled at her ability to find light even in the darkest moments. For Marcus, the aftermath of the mission brought its own challenges. Though he had saved Elena and dismantled the Iron Vanguard's stronghold, the fight against hate wasn't over. News of the gang's downfall spread quickly, sparking outrage among extremist groups across the country. Some vowed revenge, posting threats online and vowing to continue their violent crusade. Marcus knew better than anyone that hatred like theirs didn't die easily. It simply adapted, finding new ways to spread its poison. Determined to prevent another tragedy, Marcus threw himself into advocacy work. Using his status as a decorated Delta Force commander, he testified before Congress about the rising threat of domestic terrorism. His testimony painted a chilling picture of the Iron Vanguard's operations, backed by irrefutable evidence gathered during the raid on the factory. Lawmakers listened intently, moved by Marcus's words and the courage it must have taken to relive such a harrowing experience. Thanks in part to his efforts, sweeping reforms were introduced to combat hate crimes and dismantle extremist networks operating within the United States. But Marcus didn't stop there. He partnered with organizations dedicated to fighting racism and promoting unity, traveling across the country to share his story. Standing side by side with Elena, he spoke candidly about the dangers of prejudice and the importance of standing together against division. Their partnership became a symbol of hope, a powerful reminder that love could triumph over hate if people chose to stand firm. Elena joined him in these efforts, using her platform as a pediatrician to advocate for marginalized communities. She launched a foundation aimed at providing resources and support to families affected by violence and discrimination. Through fundraising events, community workshops, and educational programs, she worked tirelessly to create a world where no one would ever feel targeted because of who they were. Her passion inspired countless others to join the cause, turning her personal tragedy into a catalyst for change. As time went on, the Reeds' lives began to resemble something close to normalcy again. They returned to their suburban home, resuming routines that had once felt mundane but now seemed precious. Dinner dates, morning walks, and lazy weekends spent reading became cherished rituals, each moment infused with gratitude for the second chance they'd been given. Yet even in their quiet moments, they never forgot the fragility of peace and the responsibility they bore to protect it. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Marcus turned to Elena with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't made it?" he asked softly. The question hung in the air, heavy but necessary. Elena paused, considering his words before responding. "I think about it sometimes," she admitted. "But then I remember how far we've come. Not just us, but everyone who stood with us. We're stronger now because of it. And maybe that's why this happened. To remind us that we can't take anything for granted." Her answer struck a chord deep within Marcus. She was right. They couldn't undo the past, but they could shape the future. Together they had survived an unimaginable ordeal, emerging not as victims but as warriors for justice. Their bond had been tested in ways few couples ever experienced, yet it had only grown stronger. Love, they realized, wasn't just about joy and companionship. It was also about sacrifice, resilience, and the unwavering commitment to fight for one another. Years later, when they looked back on that chapter of their lives, they saw it not as a source of bitterness, but as a turning point. A moment that had forced them to confront evil head-on and emerge victorious. The scars remained, both visible and invisible, but so did the lessons they had learned. Hate might exist in the world, but it could never extinguish the power of compassion, courage, and unity. By then, the Iron Vanguard was nothing more than a shadow of its former self, its leaders imprisoned and its ideology discredited. The reforms Marcus had championed had led to stricter laws targeting hate groups, while public awareness campaigns helped educate communities about the dangers of extremism. Slowly but surely, progress was being made. Still, Marcus and Elena knew the battle was ongoing. As long as fear and ignorance persisted, there would always be those seeking to divide humanity. But they refused to let despair win. Instead, they focused on building bridges, connecting with others, sharing their story, and inspiring change wherever they went. Their journey had taught them that even in the face of overwhelming odds, hope could prevail if people chose to stand together. On a crisp autumn afternoon, the same season Elena had been abducted all those years ago, they visited a newly established memorial honoring victims of hate crimes. It was a simple yet poignant tribute, featuring engraved names and messages of solidarity from survivors and allies alike. As they stood hand in hand before the monument, Marcus felt a profound sense of purpose wash over him. This was their legacy. Not just survival, but transformation. They had turned pain into action, fear into strength, and tragedy into triumph. And as they walked away, bathed in golden sunlight, they knew they weren't alone. Countless others were walking alongside them, united by a shared vision of a better world. For Marcus and Elena Reed, the fight wasn't over, but neither was their resolve. Together, they would continue shining a light in the darkness, proving that love and courage could overcome even the most insidious forms of hatred.